Danny Flexen. Welcome to the latest edition of SecondsOut ReFLEXions. We're here every Monday to look back over the weekend's boxing action. And while my colleague John Houston will this week be focusing on the Triller show that saw Evander Holyfield rather sadly take a very early defeat to Vitor Belfort, and David Haye rather ludicrously call out Tyson Fury after his boring victory over Joe Fournier. That's as much analysis of that card as you're going to get from me, so tune into John's video when it's out. I'm going to focus on the British action, and particularly Sam Eggington, who was involved in a Fight of the Year candidate, as he so often is. He's become synonymous with those type of fights, against Bilel Jkitou in the headliner of the Hennessy Sports Channel 5 show that was on Friday night from Coventry. Absorbing fight. Eggington seemed to deserve the verdict after the end of 12 grueling rounds, but just a brutal contest, really good to watch as Eggington often is, but perhaps most notable by the fact that Eggington did seem to offer a few nuances, did seem to be trying to change up his game at least a bit. He's known as a blood and guts warrior, gets by on his durability and tenacity, and good chin as well, it has to be said. But currently fighting up at middleweight, although he admits he's far more suited to super welter. And if he's to challenge for titles once again, or other types of titles, obviously he's got the WBC International at middleweight at the moment, I believe. But he'd like to go back down to 154. But yeah, he did seem to be using a few nuances, few skills that we don't see from him that often. Rolling his way in, stepping off to the side at an angle after landing his shots at times as well. And that may have proven the difference in what was a very close, hard-fought contest against Jkitou, who certainly came to win, didn't lack for heart or physical strength in his own right. I think Eggington just now starting to use those kind of height and reach advantages a little bit more than perhaps he has done in the past. And there'll never be a question about Eggington's heart and guts. That'll always be there. It'll always be something he can fall back on when stuff gets hard for him. But it's always been that little bit of quality when he stepped up a level. Obviously, he won the European title, but then when he lost it, I think there was that extra little bit of quality, and it fell to that big upset as well against Morankino. So I think he's still young, although people say he might not feel like it because it seems like he's been around forever and he's been in a lot of tough fights. There's probably a fair few miles on the clock, disproportionate to his physical age, but he is still young enough to make another run, certainly at European level, if not beyond that. And especially if he can get back down, I'm sure he can, to 154. But adding these little nuances to his game, and I'm sure he's always had those in his locker. He's been fighting for a long time now. I'm sure he knows how to slip, roll, avoid shots and so on, but he just gets dragged into a war. And obviously when you're under pressure, generally with boxers, when you're under that sort of pressure, you revert back to what you know best and to what's more your natural style. And I think that's what's happened with Eggington many times over the years. But he has got those skills in his locker. He'll continue to develop them in the gym, of course, with John Pegg. And we'll hope that, as the quality of opposition increases and the value of the prizes at stake as well does so, then we will see a bit more of that version of Sam Eggington. And from him to the headliner on the Frank Warren show, also on Friday night, this one at the Copperbox Arena in Stratford. We saw Lynn take a contentious decision, not controversial because it was a very close fight, a contentious decision over fellow unbeaten, not anymore of course, Amin Jahanzeb. Not as far from as exciting a fight as Eggington Jkitou. It was a messy fight, certainly as it entered the kind of middle and later rounds. Jahanzeb, a natural counter puncher, would wait for Lynn to come in. Lynn was a bit like a bull at the gates for the majority of the fight. Came in straight lines a bit too much and smothered his own work as well. And Jahanzeb, for some rounds, was able to counter effectively, spin away, make use of the ring, which was pretty big. And a lot of people felt he'd done enough. I think Lynn came on strong, certainly in terms of effort and strength towards the end of the fight, in what was a 10-rounder. And it was very, very close by the finish. On the rare occasions when Lynn did try and box a bit more, he actually had a fair bit of success, and I think he should have done that more. And I think there's a lesson there to be learned along the lines of Eggington's alterations for Lynn going forward. I think when he forced, when he kind of circled lateral movement and forced Jahanzeb to lead, it was clear very quickly that Jahanzeb wasn't particularly comfortable leading off. He was very much a counter-puncher and in that mould. And there was times in the fight where Lynn would circle back to the ropes or into the corners, and Jahanzeb kind of shuffled forward and just kind of stopped in the middle of the ring at times because he didn't really know how to cut the ring off or to create openings from the front foot. And I think Lynn could have made more of that and counterpunch more effectively, and certainly mixed it up a bit. You know, he's a natural aggressor. His work rate's always been really high back since the amateurs, but there could have been a bit more head movement on the way in, a bit more upper body movement. Feet could have been a bit quicker at times as well. And also that kind of smothering of his own work could have been avoided with a little half step back on occasions as well. I think you've got to be able to mix it up a bit as you go through the levels, and Lynn certainly has ambitions beyond the domestic sphere. So if he wants to realise those goals, then he will need to not just rely on his incredible engine, his heart, which is not, you know, questionable. You know, he's got all that, but he needs to use his boxing brain a bit more. And there is one there, and people who've seen him in the amateurs will tell you that. Kevin Mitchell, who used to train him, Martin Bowers, who trains him now, will all tell you he's got a good boxing brain. Anyone who sparred him as well. And while perhaps his biggest asset is that engine, is that non-stop mentality, and people who have sparred him have said that, you know, he's so difficult to spar because he is just non-stop. He is always on top of you. There has to be a bit of nuance as well when you start fighting these guys like Jahanzeb, who are clever, awkward, tricky. You need a bit more about your game. You need to throw punches in bunches. You need to move on the way in. You need to approach from different angles instead of just going straight ahead at the target. And Lynn will know all that, but it's just putting it into practice on the big stage. And let's not forget, this was his first headline fight, TV headline on BT Sport, Queensbury Promotions, of course. And he'll learn from it. You know, unlike Eggington, who's been under the lights many, many times, has had fights at a much higher level, and is kind of still learning as he goes. Lynn's still very early on in his journey, and perhaps, you know, has more time to make things a natural, or not natural, but make things a more seamless part of his style than Eggington has, because he's fought a certain way for such a long time, whereas Louie Lynn's not a blank canvas, of course. He's still been fighting for quite a while if you include the amateurs, but he's still earlier on in his career to make those adjustments. And I think there's a lesson there for him. He got the win, and he'll be grateful, and he'll feel satisfied that he got through it. But it was a very messy fight. It certainly wasn't his best performance. And I think there's I wouldn't say easy alterations, but there's certainly clear and obvious alterations he can make to give himself easier nights against that level of opposition, and more importantly, successful nights against a better level of opposition as he moves through the levels, which is what he wants to do. That's what I think. Anyway, I'd like to hear what you guys think of thought of the domestic fights over the weekend. Eggington, obviously in the main event on Channel 5, Louie Lynn on BT Sport, or any of the undercard fights as well on those two shows. Let me know your thoughts. I will respond to some of them, and I will be back on Monday for on Thursday for ReFLEXions. Looking ahead to next weekend's action, although I don't think it's a particularly huge weekend. We have got a British title fight on the Fight Zone show, so that will be interesting in itself. And a few other bits and pieces going on there. I think Cash Ali's back out on that show as well. So I'll be back for that 4:30, and then next week Monday, ReFLEXions looking back on that weekend at the same time. Really appreciate you watching as always, and I'll see you all soon.